Welcome to the FarmBits podcast, a product of Nebraska Extension Digital Agriculture. I'm Jackson Stansel.
And I'm Samantha Teaton, and we come to you each week to discuss the trends, the realities, and the value of digital agriculture.
Through interviews and panels with experts, producers, and innovators from all sectors of digital technology, we hope that you step away from each episode with new practical knowledge of digital agriculture technology.
Hello, FarmBits followers, and welcome to another episode of the FarmBits podcast. We are glad to have you with us as we share our experiences at TechHub Live. The first ever TechHub Live conference was held this summer in Des Moines, Iowa, and focused on bringing together agriculture and technology. We were impressed with all the innovative producers, service providers, university extension personnel, and ag technology companies that attended the event. On this episode, we meet with some of TechHub Live's most innovative participants to discuss the current trends in ag technology, including drone imagery, precision ag applications, and ag sustainability. Here is our conversation with John Scott from Purdue Extension. John, do you want to start by just introducing yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I'm John Scott. I'm the Digital Agriculture Extension Coordinator for Purdue Extension, and I also am on the Wabash Harlan Innovation Network grant, which is a 10-county consortium centered in northwest Indiana. So basically, it's Tippecanoe County, the Lafayette area, and the surrounding counties.
All right, great. So we're at TechHub Live in Des Moines, Iowa, and you gave a workshop today about imagery and drones. Can you maybe give us a quick overview of the type of material you discussed today?
Yeah, sure. So it was the goal of that was really drone imagery and using drones for beginners was what we were shooting for, and we talked about some of the drones that we use in Extension. We've got throughout the state, most of the educators. We've got about 23 educators across the state of Indiana that have a UAV. They mostly have Phantom 4 Pros that they're using in their communities. And the big thing in Indiana and in most throughout the Midwest, is corn and soybeans. So we do a lot of row crop work with them, get a lot of imagery from that. And then we talk to farmers about it, and we talk to other stakeholders. We're also doing work in livestock. We're doing things around structures and granaries. There's always, good harvest pictures and things like that to get, and videos, and talk about what we can do with some of the technology there. But primarily for the extension is the Phantom 4 that we're using. Our researchers, they have a suite of different things. I mean, some of them have some homemade things or not off the shelf stuff that they put together for research and things like that. That's pretty interesting. Today we focused mostly on how can we use these tools, though, in an applied setting.
Are there any issues that you see in the ag industry when they're using drones for collecting imagery? What are the main issues that people are running into?
As far as issues that we're seeing, one is getting people aware that they need to be certified when they're operating for in agriculture, because pretty much all agriculture operations with these drones are commercial operations in the eyes of the Federal Aviation Administration. So getting folks to realize that, hey, it's not just my field I'm flying for. Well, as soon as you make a decision on that field to the FAA, that's a commercial operation. So you need to be certified. Whether money changes hands or not, it's about value creation. So that's a big challenge, and that's on the legal side. As far as the imagery, we're good at taking pictures. Well, most of the time we're good at taking pictures. We can snap a picture. Getting a good picture is a challenge. And then what do we do with it? What do we do with the data that we collected in the field? So the data analytics component, and more important than just the analytics, but what do we do with the data once it's been analyzed? Those are things that we're still struggling with across the board of, how do we use this information?
Yeah, and is there any keys to using this technology and actually turning it into actionable data? How do we get to where we need to be? Is there what are the steps we need to take to get there?
Part of it is just working with it more, I think, working with the technology itself and understanding what is it capable of. It's been really interesting to me since I started working with UAVs in 2017, it's been really interesting to see how much the technology has progressed just in the last 4 or 5 years. And if you look further back than that, I mean, it's leaps and bounds, and that's been really neat to see, where we're at now. Some of the other keys, I think, are, bringing all the different pieces in. So not just UAV imagery, but can we bring in the yield data? Can we bring in the soil data and start putting all these data layers together? I think we can start unlocking quite a bit more. And then you get into more the, really heavy on the data analytics, the big data, if you will, in some cases. What do we do with all that? And where does that fit in? I think that's kind of where we're at.
Thank you, John Scott with Purdue Extension, for our discussion at TechHub Live. I appreciate learning how drone imagery is used on farms and where the technology is going over the next few years. Here's our conversation with Aaron Sindelar, Sustainability Lead with Central Valley Ag in Nebraska. So, Aaron, can you please tell us about yourself, a little bit about your background, and what brought you to your current role at Central Valley Ag?
Absolutely. So I'm from a family farm, northeast Nebraska, kind of from the Howell-Schuyler area. Went to University of Nebraska and a Kasner graduate in 2006. Then I went on and pursued additional schooling, went to Kansas State University for a master's, and then actually achieved my doctorate from the University of Minnesota. Kind of what got me to Central Valley Ag was just an opportunity to work with farmers. I love being able to have that face-to-face interaction with growers, helping them improve their operation. And this is kind of an area with sustainability where there's not a lot of emphasis or service kind of within this area. So again, just kind of a new opportunity where carving our own path, there's really no roadmap to be able to do this, but again, bringing additional opportunity and service to growers, just kind of on a different side where, obviously when we think about co-ops, we think about, that's where you can buy your seed, your chemical, your feed, things like that. And this was just kind of an opportunity where now we can help growers with conservation and sustainability.
Yeah, so what do you see as the role of the farmer-owned co-ops, their role in ag sustainability?
Yeah, so at Central Valley Ag, our mission is to do whatever we can to produce and bring additional value to our farmer members. And again, this was an opportunity where in this sector, just in ag in general, quite honestly, when you look outside of the traditional outlets like the NRCSs, the NRDs, and so on, there isn't a whole lot of service out there for growers to be able to get answers, consultation, and things like that when it comes to making conservation practice adoption or trying to become more sustainable. So this was just kind of an area that was empty, number one. And then number two, this was something that our members were asking for. They wanted that touch point or that person that they can call and kind of ask these questions. As we see conservation, sustainability becoming more important within ag, and seeing the general consumers asking for this type of products a little bit more, it was just a little bit of an organic kind of transition to be able to provide something like this to our growers.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the practices that growers are really interested in? What are they really looking for to implement on their farms?
Yeah. So when you talk about sustainability, it's such kind of a broad umbrella kind of a term. And when you jump to that, your mind automatically wanders to the tillage reduction, the cover crop adoption. And those are kind of the two main practices that we're seeing growers wanting to adopt. Within our footprint, so CVA's footprint, we cover a significant swath in eastern Nebraska, but we also have territories or areas within north central Kansas as well as northwest Iowa. And within our geography, we estimate that probably 40 to 45% of the geography is already implementing some type of tillage reduction. Maybe it's a no-till, maybe it's a strip till, or some kind of a conservation. So we've got a pretty good representation with that. And then on the second side, cover crops, there's a lot of intrigue and interest about cover crops, but growers want to understand, what does it mean for their operation? And can they leverage them potentially and kind of live in harmony where can they put a cover crop in and can they still maintain their profitability? The bottom line is, can they do it without losing money? So it's kind of helping growers try to understand that and kind of do a little bit of research to try to figure out if they can kind of live in that harmony between the two. So those are the main two. But then even kind of expanding out of that, something that I'm really interested in is sustainability around nitrogen management. Especially we look in Nebraska where we look across some of our NRD, kind of NRD zones or districts. And in some of those districts, we have some different nitrogen management regulations going on, whether they're phase 1, phase 2, kind of depending on where that grower might be located. And what can we do to help improve their nitrogen management sustainability and also abide by those regulations that they might be facing? And we're doing that with improving our nutrient management tracking. Are we doing some enhanced soil sampling with grid sampling, things like that? Split nitrogen applications, leveraging a stabilizer. So that's kind of what we're doing on the nitrogen side, or kind of the nutrient management side from a sustainability beyond just the tillage and cover crop practices.
How is ag technology, how does that fit into the sustainability in agriculture and what CVA is doing?
Yeah, so it fits together really well because the goal of precision ag, leveraging site-specific management or any other kind of practices, could be on the crop side. We're even exploring and really expanding into the water management side with leveraging irrigation sensors and so on. But when you think about conservation sustainability and what you're trying to achieve with precision ag, when you're adopting those precision ag technologies, you're trying to make better usage of your resources, either becoming more efficient with what you're doing, or on the other side, being able to reduce those inputs without hurting yield. So it kind of depends which camp you want to go into. So again, everything fits together really well, and being able to leverage those precision ag technologies is just one way that you can help improve your sustainability.
Yeah, and at TechHub Live, when we met back in July, we talked about a collaboration with a third-party company called Stroet. Can you tell us a little bit about their platform and how we can use it to enhance sustainability and to improve a grower's markets?
Yep. So Stroet is the sustainability branch under Land O'Lakes. And they're really focused on, again, just really improving grower sustainability, conservation efforts. And they have a program called Stroet, like you referred to, Stroet Insights Engine, where what I really like about that program is it allows you to place some metrics or scores on what conservation practices they're doing within a grower's operation. If we're looking at improving or showing a grower what sustainability can do if they adopt a practice, what this program allows us to do is plug in management information of that grower's current situation, and then we can select what if scenario. So maybe that grower is interested in adopting a cover crop. We can select cover crop as a what if scenario and run the comparison and show him or her what that would do to their sustainability. Now, when I say sustainability, we're looking at the main metrics of wind and water erosion, carbon storage, as well as greenhouse gas emissions and nitrogen use efficiency. So we can, again, kind of show them that scoring of what it would look like if they were to adopt that practice, as well as what I also really like about it is, when we think about adopting a conservation practice and we think about just overall soil science and how changing soil properties is a slow process. That's something that can take several years of adopting a specific practice until we see those changes actually happening. What I really like about Stroet Insights Engine is that it can kind of show us the in progress kind of changes. So again, we put those practices into the Insights Engine, we run the simulations. We can show the grower that even though we're not seeing those changes show up visibly in the field, here is what is still happening within that field that's actually happening with these practices, instead of, again, waiting 5 years until we can physically see it. Because that's kind of the challenge we face with, say, cover crops, for example. In general, growers that are interested in them, they understand the benefits of that. They understand the environmental and the soil improvement benefits. But unfortunately, we're kind of facing the economic problem is that the growers have to make that upfront investment for the cover crop multiple years. And the reality of it is that some growers just aren't able to or willing to make that 5-year commitment within the field of planting a cover crop and waiting that long until they see the actual changes. So if we can kind of show them the documentation and the changes through the computer modeling within the Tributary Insights engine, it's just another way where we can kind of show value a little bit sooner instead of waiting until year 5 or 7 or whenever we start to see those changes actually happening.
Yeah. So is there anything that we missed that you would like to share?
I don't think so. I think, the biggest thing that I always want to tell growers is that, if you're interested in making these changes, these sustainability practices, adopting a cover crop, something like that, this is something where don't feel like you have to try to wait, do it on your own. There's a lot of information out there, and it's really hard to synthesize it all together. And that's where, leveraging your local cooperative, your extension, your NRCS office, there's a wide range of resources that you can leverage to make sure that you're making the proper changes. When I look at things when it comes to agronomically, if I'm making a conservation practice change, there's a lot of kind of subsidiary things that I have to think about and potentially adjust to make sure that it's going to be able to be inclusive in my system really well. Things like, let's just talk about a tillage reduction, for example. You're looking at maybe making a switch to no-till. It starts with the equipment. Are there changes do I have to make to my equipment? Some people feel like if I'm going to make a change to a no-till situation, I have to go buy a new planter. And that not necessarily isn't the case. Again, visiting with maybe your equipment provider, they may be able to help you make that change, or maybe you just need to make adjustments to add growth cleaners or something like that. Again, agronomically, things that need to be considered are your seed selection. Maybe making a change to your nutrient management plan, your pest management plan. There's just a lot of different things that they're not going to necessarily require wholesale changes, but they're just slight adjustments where, individually, all those changes maybe add up to a couple bushels a piece. But when you put them all together, when we're talking about corn, then it all of a sudden adds up into 10 to 15 bushels. So a lot of little things add up to a big thing, and they're just, again, minor, small adjustments that you might have to make just to make sure that you're maximizing your situation.
Thank you, Aaron, for joining us on FarmBits. I enjoyed hearing about the sustainable farming practices used by CVA's farmer members and how precision ag tools can enhance their sustainability. Our next conversation is with Jeff Wessels and Brian Vandestroot from Frenchman Valley Co-op in Nebraska. So, Brian, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Brian Vandestroot. I grew up southeast South Dakota, came with Frenchman Valley in March of 2018. And since then, I've been working as an APA, transitioning more into the acre plus role and getting more of the technical support side of things.
All right, good. Jeff, would you mind introducing yourself?
My name is Jeff Wessels. I'm the Precision Agricultural Manager at Frenchman Valley Co-op.
So, Jeff, can you tell us a little bit about precision ag in southwest Nebraska and kind of how things have changed over the years?
Yes, so some of the issues that we have out there is different than the eastern part of the state. We have a lot of lower organic matter soils because we have less rainfall. Our crop yield's a bit lower. We have higher pH issues, that type of thing. So it gives us some unique challenges out there.
Yeah. And Brian, what are some of the issues, agronomic issues that you're seeing in southwest Nebraska, and how can you maybe use precision ag tools to maybe solve some of those issues?
A lot of what we've seen is some over application of fertilizers or not applying fertilizers in the right ratios. What we're trying to do in Acre Plus is do what they're already doing, but provide an add-on service. So if they're using their strip till equipment to meet their phosphorus needs, then we can come in with an above ground unit and top everything off using yield goal zones and then the soil maps from the grids, try and make their farming practices as efficient as possible.
Yeah. And Brian, can you tell me what is something that you've seen at TechHub Live that you find to be most exciting?
I'd say it's mostly, it's really two things. One would be the autonomy of everything. We've kind of dipped our toe into that a little bit, but you really see all the different companies that are trying to do it, whether it's through drones or through autonomous tractors. And the next would just be people are recognizing and trying to really strive together for that need to integrate all these companies together. They know that farmers have a lot of different platforms to work with. We have quite a few platforms to work with, so there's just a need from everywhere, from retailers to growers, to try and get all this integrated. So you get a better scope of how these different companies are working together to make that happen.
Sure. And Jeff, is there anything at TechHub Live that you think is really neat for the future of ag?
What I notice is trends over all the years I've went to conferences, and you can kind of tell what the industry is thinking. So right now, the trend here is like what Brian said. There are quite a few software vendors here, a lot of things with telematics, and so you can tell that that's kind of the direction. It gets into that. What are we going to do with the data? How are we going to do the digital farming part of it? And I think that is the industry is looking at that way, and it's very good. And I do agree with what Brian said. You're seeing finally a lot more capabilities of companies that will work together. They're not trying to say, okay, well, I don't want to work with anyone else. And so that's very, very exciting to see that occurring, that we're going to be able to get some cooperation across software lines and hardware lines.
Yeah. And is there anything that you guys would want to talk about that you think that we've missed during the conversation?
It pays to pay attention to your fields, what they're doing. I think, managing a field as its own entity can provide you with a lot of benefits. Just trying to get a cost per acre for each field, so then you can see what's doing good, what's doing better, so you can get a better idea of how to manage your farm as a whole. It really just starts down at the grid sampling level, where you're doing parts of the field, and then you're going to fields within the farm, and then farms within a field, how that works. And it just comes down to figuring out what works best for your operation.
Thanks to Jeff and Brian with Frenchman Valley Co-op. I learned a great deal from our conversation about the challenges your growers face and how ag technology is being used to find solutions. Our next conversation is with David Scheiderer, owner-manager of Integrated Ag Services in Ohio.
My name is Dave Scheiderer. I am the owner of Integrated Ag Services. We are a crop consulting firm here in West Central Ohio. Been in business now for 31 years. Almost all of our business, we work directly with growers, from making variable rate fertilizer prescriptions, seed, fertilizer, lime, very little chemical at this point, but we do a lot of prescriptive chemical recommendations, and do a lot of scouting, do a lot of soil sampling, and enjoy agriculture.
Great. So can you give us maybe an overview of some of the precision ag tools that you're using with growers?
So some of it is just pretty traditional stuff. Our GIS platform primarily is SMS, and that's what we use a lot to do our prescriptions. We are using a lot of Ag Leader products as far as Agfinity. We use it a lot to connect with growers. We also, the My John Deere or John Deere Command Center, that's becoming very popular. We use that. We try to connect with any platform that the farmer is using. So we try to be somewhat platform agnostic, and we just try and connect with the grower the way they want to connect. Probably what makes us a little bit unique, we actually have hold a patent on an automated soil sampling system, and we do a lot of high density soil sampling. We do about, I'm going to guess 60,000 acres a year of half acre grids. Every 150 feet, we take a soil sample. lab because we take a lot of soil samples, which is kind of unique. In the last 3 years, we've hooked up with a company called Tyrannus that we use their machine learning software. We take images from drones and it varies a little bit from 50 to 80 feet above the crop. We use high resolution cameras. We fly the drones, we take the pictures, we feed them to Tyrannus, and they use their machine learning software. Does a really cool job of identifying weeds, weed populations, and plant stands, insects, insect damage, disease. And our goal is to eventually get to the place that our consultants, customers, use this tool strictly as the tool is used to do the scouting, the hard work, and then our agronomists and our customers can plug in and then specifically look for problems in specific areas of the field, already knowing what the problems are. It's more of a validation, what we do, so we can focus more on the agronomy and less on the boots on the ground, although boots on the ground are still very important, but we need to be able to do it efficiently. And then we use another company out of Iowa called Premier Crop, and they help us plugging into our customers more from a high-end agronomic perspective, turning the farm into a test plot, a lot of on-farm research that can be done through that program. A lot more of the economics drive decisions. So that would be our high-end consulting program where we use Premier Crops tools to help us do that. So that's kind of what we're doing these days.
Wow, that's a pretty good overview. I'm curious about the high definition soil sampling. Is there different soils in your area that you really see a benefit from the really high definition grid as opposed to, more either zone sampling or maybe larger grids? What's the major benefits that you're seeing from those?
Our soil structures are such that we have a tremendous amount of variability. So it's very common for us to have in a field, for example, organic matters can vary from 1% to 5%. Mm-hmm. So because of that variability, it lends itself more to high density soil sampling. So that's kind of the easy overview answer. But the other side of it is for me being in this business for such a long time, I've been around the soil sampling business forever. And so much so that when it started, it was one sample or one set of samples per field. So one sample resolved out of many cores in the field, and you just did a field average. And saw all the problems with that. When I started the business, we moved into more of a management zone type sampling where we used mostly soil surveys to identify the management zones and soil sample them that way. So we would, in a lot of cases, on a 50-acre field, 6 or 8 samples out of those zones. Many cores collected in those zones, but in effect, there would be maybe anywhere from 3 to 6 zones in that field. Still had tremendous variability, still and struggled to get consistency. We would sample a zone one year. The next year you would resample it. And for example, pH would be 6.3, and the next year you would sample it, it would be 6.8, and then the next year it'd be back down to 6.3 again. And so we battled through that. I mean, that was better than a whole field, but still tremendous variability. Went from there into the 2.5 acre grid sampling, which was kind of, and still is kind of an industry standard. Saw some improvement as far as being able to get a little more repeatable, but still tremendous variability. We couldn't, and we had to rely on interpolation methods to help us that would in turn create the recommendation. And we had some of the same issues where the repeatability of that was not consistent at all. And so what I told myself is if money was not the object, if we could do whatever we wanted to, how would we soil sample to get the best results? And the answer was we would take a lot more samples. And so Then I looked at, from a business perspective, why don't we take more samples? And it's like most things in life, time and money. It's very time consuming to take high density soil sampling, and the lab costs limit you on how many samples you can take. It wasn't that anybody, I won't say anybody, but I think most agronomists understand that interpolation methods, they're fraught with errors when you have high variability. So that's what led us that way. It took us 4 or 5 years to truly develop the automated system. We do that, and the other part about the system is it takes a sample exactly the same way each time. So we get some consistency that way. So now we're able to take a sample about every 15 seconds. And by doing it that way, we can take a lot of samples. By incorporating the whole system into our lab, we eliminated a lot of the time consuming part of getting a sample collected and then to the lab with codes and containers and things like that. It's all been streamlined. So it's very, 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 very smooth and fast process. So out of that, we're able to do high density sampling at what we feel like is a reasonable cost. And we still use interpolation methods, but now we're interpolating from about 150 feet away from a sample.
Yeah, and as far as pest management decisions and crop protection, you mentioned some companies that you were partnering with, like Tyrannus. What are you trying to accomplish with precision ag as far as making a diagnosis if there's an issue in the field during the season?
So first of all, I think this is the area that in the next 5 years, you're going to see tremendous change. And this change may be partially from the see and spray technology that's coming forward, or for sure it's going to be built around machine learning. And by machine learning, it's simply, I always like to say it's just teaching a machine, a computer, to really think like humans think. When you walk out the door, when you walk in a cornfield, and you see gray leaf spot, which is a pretty predominant disease in our part of the world. After you've looked at gray leaf spot, the first time you go into a cornfield, you're 20 years old and you're an intern for a seed company and you don't know what gray leaf spot looks like. So you walk in the field and you go, I don't know what this is. And then somebody explains it to you and says, well, these lesions, they represent gray leaf spot. Oh, okay. And so then you look some more and you go, oh, I think that's gray leaf spot. But after you've looked at 500 cornfields and you've seen them at different growth stages and different varieties, you're learning, you're teaching yourself. You can now just glance at a corn leaf and go, that's gray leaf spot, and that's an economic threshold we need to spray. So what this machine learning does for us is we right now and forever in the consulting business, we've got to apply that human knowledge to make those decisions. And the challenge with that is that you've only got a limited amount of that resource, that human knowledge, to get across thousands and thousands of acres of corn to help growers identify whether they need to spray or not spray. The other challenge is it's just physically restricting that when corn gets so tall, you have to walk through it and that's it. And the ability to walk through corn, a large cornfield, and do that day after day after day is very, very limiting on how many acres you can see. So now you apply things like drone technology to where the drone can fly over top of the cornfield, look into the corn, take pictures, and then those pictures are then processed. So that becomes, in effect, the human learning becomes machine learning. And it says, I've seen this 10,000 times. I know that's gray leaf spot. And for us, what's really important is not only does it identify what the pest is, but it tells us the level. So, and we have now documentation. We know that from a GPS location, we know what the pest level was and what the pest was. And so instead of having one person walking through a cornfield and going, yep, it's gray leaf spot, I see it, we need to spray. And in reality, they may have only looked at 1% of the whole cornfield. We may have 300 or 500 or 100, whatever, depending on field size, pictures that help us identify that disease and what that population of that disease is. Real and actionable numbers, values. What that does is it A, helps us make a much better decision. We take a lot of the emotion out of these decisions. But B, because it's a real and actionable number, we can start to plug that in to different algorithms. For example, with a disease, and we have not done this yet, but this is kind of where we're heading, is when you start to capture this real and actionable data, now it can be plugged into an algorithm. Now you can use really good models that take into consideration the weather, the crop, the planting date, and it can now take this and just leverage all that and make you a much better agronomist, saying there's a high likelihood that you will see a response from a fungicide on these fields because of past and present weather, because of disease threshold numbers, and because of the crop that's in the field. So it's very much an emerging technology, but it's going to make us much, much, much better agronomists than anything we can do today. Very excited about that.
Yeah. I guess I got a question about some of the high definition scouting. So with drones, you can kind of get a good look at something like defoliation or pests that are higher up in the canopy. I'm curious about pests that are maybe lower in the canopy. A lot of pests are bottom up pests, spider mites, gray leaf spot was one. Are there other platforms that you're seeing as far as sampling techniques that you're kind of keeping an eye out for that could maybe get a better view across these different types of pests of what's going on in your field?
Yeah, that's a really good question. My best example I can give is probably gray leaf spot. Gray leaf spot tends to develop in the corn plant down in the bottom of the canopy. And the kind of the trigger that we use to determine whether gray leaf spot is a problem or not is how quickly and how far up the corn canopy it's moved. So when you're doing drone imagery, yeah, we can get really, really high resolution, and we can see into that corn canopy about maybe 2-3 feet into the canopy. But that disease development is down there in the bottom third of the canopy. And in many cases, we need to be able to look down in that canopy 5 or 6 feet to be able to see it. And sometimes we can, and sometimes we can't. So what we really need is we need technology that allows us to look at the bottom of the canopy up. And there's a product. The company is called Acre. They've developed a pod that it's basically an array of cameras on a stick. It's actually on a rope, and it drops this pod from a drone down into the canopy, hits the ground, comes back up a couple of feet, and then starts taking pictures of that under canopy to determine a disease threshold. For us is what we're most interested in. And it's interesting technology. It's one of those that, for me at least, I want to see it proven out. It needs to be tied to good quality machine learning. The practical side of it is how many images can you take per hour or per minute with something that's got an array of cameras hanging from a rope off of the drone. I think it's got potential, so I'm not here to say it doesn't. I'm just saying that we need to see it perform and see it give us good data back. But that's an emerging technology that I think could be used to complement something like the imagery stuff that Taranis is currently using. So that's one thing that helps us out on those challenges. The other piece is we have, as you get into the deep end of these canopies, it becomes a challenge because particularly corn is very good at capturing sunlight. So you have a lot what I call shadow casting when you drop into that canopy, and that really makes it difficult and more complicated to get a good image so that you can see disease lesions, especially small lesions like gray leaf spot. I think the solution to that is really dropping something into the canopy to take that picture. And so everything is a little darker down there, and you can adjust the camera accordingly and do a better job of capturing what you need.
Do you have any advice for anyone, a grower consultant that's maybe just getting started into this technology, whereas ag tech is really moving fast at this time if they're trying to jump in? Do you have any advice for someone?
Well, I've got a lot of advice. Do you want good advice?
Yes.
Yeah, I think, things are moving fast, and they're moving much faster than they ever have, probably in mankind. But they are not moving that fast. In other words, probably some of the biggest mistakes I've made is thinking that I had to move really fast right now because a year from now, this technology was going to leapfrog me and I was going to be behind. And that's not really the case. You always want to be seeking out good technology, but you want that good technology to have a practical application. Every day we all see things where we go, wow, that's pretty neat. Look what it could do, and with the emphasis on what it could do. And lo and behold, 5 years later, that technology has gone away because it couldn't do it. So my advice is to really, really look for cutting edge, leading technology. But it's kind of like what we're talking about with our turning the farm into a test plot is you should be testing these concepts. And before you go out and invest a lot of money or think that this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, test it and make sure it truly does work and it has a true value back to your grower. We call it HD scouting, which is our using Taranis and the drones and imagery. This is our third year, and we're still in a learning and testing phase. We feel like we've year one was nothing more than we just had an idea that it might work. Year two, we got to where we did some acres and we learned a lot about what I call the production side of it. How do we get across these acres in a timely manner? What do we have to do to get that done? This year was really truly the first year where we actually ran it as a production system. And year four will probably be that year where we finally get it to that place where we can feel like it's commercially viable and we can take it to our growers and really show the ROI back to them how it works. And so while technology is changing really, really fast, that's a 4-year time horizon on some very, very fast emerging technology. So cool stuff out there, but make sure you vet it well before you jump in and spend a lot of money on it.
Is there anything that you think that we've missed that we need to touch on here?
I think that if more on the data management side of it, that's one area that I'm finding interesting is that, and it's not really an agronomy piece, but it ties pretty closely with the agronomy, is that growers really seem to appreciate somebody that can help them manage the data. That we're now doing a pretty good job of, we can collect lots of yield data, we can collect lots of as planted data, from planting information to spraying information. But if that information isn't organized properly and isn't stored properly, then it's nothing. It's worthless, really. And I think growers in general are starting to understand that. I think some of the more progressive growers are starting to realize, hey, if I make a commitment, they make the investment in the equipment. We've got these cloud systems now. I come back to the John Deere Command Center, and there's several different, pretty much every manufacturer is building out a cloud system that allows them to store data and to have a central repository for all their information. That's moving things along pretty quickly. And I think that's going to help us build some value so that we can take everything that they're storing and do some analytics against it and then give it back to them. But it's think there's a real opportunity for those that want to be in this space, because it's going to be, I really think for the agronomists of the future, they're going to wear that hat of being the guy that can go in the field and have a really clear understanding of all the pests, disease, weeds, whatever it is. But it's also going to be the guy that can help growers to understand for the first time, really ever, can pull this together and help them make really good decisions based on all that data. So the data management aspect of it, I think, is really it's going to be a more mature business model than it has been to date. We're finally getting past the phase of, wow, I've got a yield map, I can collect data, to now to let's make sure we can do something with this stuff.
Thanks to David with Integrated Ag Services. I appreciate gaining insight into agronomy in Ohio and how this company is evaluating new technologies for the future. That concludes our TechHub Live episode of FarmBits. Keeping up with new technology can be challenging at times, and the conference provided a valuable overview of the ag technology field and an opportunity to meet others interested in ag tech. My favorite part was learning from the different perspectives of speakers featured at the event, which include farmers, tech company reps, university extension, and crop advisors.
Thank you for taking the time to join us today on the FarmBits podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts to be informed about the latest content each week.
We welcome your feedback, so if you have comments or questions for us, please reach out to us over email, on Twitter, or in the review section of your favorite podcast platform. Our contact information can be found in the show notes.
We'd like to thank Nebraska Extension for their support of this podcast and their commitment to providing high-quality informational material to members of the agricultural community in Nebraska and beyond.
The opinions expressed by the hosts and guests on this podcast are solely their own and do not reflect reviews of Nebraska Extension or the University of Nebraska-Lincoln.
We look forward to you joining us next week for another episode of FarmBits.